We got four of you, you know who you are. Come up and grab a seat. And there's a couple microphones here that you can pass around to each other. Pass to each other if you don't want to answer, just hand it to the person next to you. And we'll start by having you guys introduce yourself. So this is the first time that we've done this here at Gospel Men. And the idea is, especially after lunch, after we've all had Famous Dave's, to have an interactive kind of discussion time. But we thought with this topic this year of the gospel in the workplace, that we really want to keep drilling down to the very, very practical day-to-day issues that all of us are dealing with in one way or another. So this is an opportunity to hear from some guys that are just not only value the local church very highly and are committed to the kingdom and expanding the gospel, but also have various levels of experience and expertise in the work world and trying to integrate the two, faith and work. So, discussion, questions from you guys. We don't have a mic to pass around, but I think it's a small enough group here. We can hear questions and even pick that up on the recording. So let me start. I'll ask you guys. Thanks for being part of this, by the way. We'll start here with you, Tom. If you could just introduce yourself and maybe share what you do right now for your job, where you work, and just really briefly kind of your history of what you've done in the past. Just 2 or 3 minutes maybe each. Go ahead.
Right. I'm Tom Morley, and I'm a human resources manager at a IT services company. So I'm the person on the video who makes people do the Recessian stuff and all the stuff they don't want to do. But I do it because someone has to do it. My career began in banking. I actually came out of college and I worked at a bank, and I actually hated it. I didn't like getting people into debt, and I was telling somebody else here I actually had to telemarket people, so I was one of those guys who would call you at dinner time and ask you if you wanted a loan or a CD and get hung up on. So that wasn't much fun. And a friend of mine actually introduced me to the concept of, God wired you a certain way. God has gifts and abilities that He's given you. Let's find out where those might fit. So through kind of a journey, I ended up in human resources, and it's actually been a really good fit for me and enjoyable. So I think I found my niche, but it just took a while to figure that out.
So my name's Ben Wright, and so I have sort of an explorer's heart, sort of baked into me. So I've had a variety of jobs, and currently in the legal field, and I'll get to that specifically what I do, but really have held 4 jobs, or not really careers, but jobs. Started off doing consulting right out of college for a company called Arthur Andersen, which is now bankrupt due to ethical issues at Enron. Some of you may remember that. And then ended up going back to school, coaching track at the collegiate level, and running semi-professional track for a few years. And then that was sort of phase 2. And then phase 3 was I spent 5 years in the Army doing criminal litigation, so both as a prosecutor and a defense attorney. And then more recently, since I've moved to the Twin Cities, I work in compliance, which is an extension of the legal field. Worked at Target for 3 years, and then I now work for a health insurance company. And in this particular role, I'm responsible to ensure that the company I work for follows the rules and regulations applicable to them, and also maintains an ethical environment, follow ethical rules, which is, as a lawyer, some of you are probably thinking that's kind of ironic, but believe it or not, there is a role for lawyers in that field. And I like to think my life has come full circle, having started off at a company that's now bankrupt because of Enron. Maybe I was inspired to go into compliance, but I said that in the interview, but might not have been, well, I didn't, but it just happened to be a good job that came my way. So.
Hi, my name is Jamie Anderson. I am the president of a company called Emergent Networks, which is a company that I started 12 years ago. Kind of interesting circumstances on how that started. I went to Iowa State with Andy's wife, and clone to the bone. I was there, did electrical engineering, came up and was working at a company called ADC Telecommunications. They closed, after about 2 years, they closed the plant that I was working at. At the time, I was doing my MBA at night at Carlson over here at the U of M, and so I tried to get into the full-time program there, and I had to reapply, and they wouldn't transfer my credits, so I started this company called Emergent Networks, and I was living with my brother, and I had no expenses, and was just trying to get through school, and it turned into something, and so that's what I do now. My job has kind of evolved from the guy doing the work to now kind of overseeing what's done. So,
my name is Jared Daugherty, and my dad has worked for the same company for over 50 years, and then he retired for 9 months, and then he couldn't handle it, so he actually got a full-time employment again. So I've worked since I was 8. I saw my dad work, and I was like, I want to work. So got my first job as a paper boy. I had that for 5 or 6 years. And I was a food containment engineer, or a carry-out grocery bagger.
Wow.
My brother and I thought it sounded better. Maybe we could get paid higher.
I love that.
But throughout the years, I actually worked for a medical company for about 15 years. Sent me out to Seattle where I met Jesus. And then I actually worked for horticulture for almost 10 years, which I'm currently in, and also planted Revolution Church. So lots of different things over the years, and love to work with my hands. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I'll just start off with a question just to give us a little more feel for kind of what you've wrestled with, and then we can open it up to other questions. But as you think about the challenge to integrate faith and work, in your experience, what has been like one thing that has really challenged you, something that you've wrestled with in trying to live out the gospel in the various roles that you've had?
So I'll talk about 2 different experiences. So when I was working at ADC, I was first job out of college, super excited about working and sharing my faith in the workplace. And ironically, so that fall was when 9/11 happened, and I had a guy that I worked with from Pakistan who's a devout Muslim guy, and literally the day after it happened, I got to work that morning in my cube, and he's sitting there almost in tears, basically so fearful of what everyone's going to think of him as a Muslim guy. And so we had, for the next year, we just had awesome conversations. I'd take him out to lunch and just talk about all kinds of great things. So that was really fun for me to actually be able to share my faith. And what's been challenging for me in the position that I'm in now is, and I don't really know the HR answer to this. I don't know what how far I'm able to push that, with having employees and I'm not able to be. I'm very open. I mean, my people that work for me know what I believe and things like that, but I'm not able to share the gospel as openly as I feel like I was when I was just a coworker with someone. So.
How many employees do you oversee, Jamie?
Oh, we have 65.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and they probably are a little hesitant to disagree with the president of the company, right? When you're sharing.
It's funny
so
because
that's a challenging.
Yeah, it's like I'm just like you guys, I've got 3 kids at home, and but yeah, some people get a little intimidated by that.
Okay. Awesome. Anybody else? Can you think of a challenge that you've kind of wrestled with on this journey?
Sure. I would have a similar one because I am the HR person, so do I sanction myself if I am too aggressive in my faith? It all gets weird. And I think just me being in the way. Sometimes when you're trying to accomplish something at a company and you have a management role or responsibility, you can do it by force or by, you have the rules, you have the stick, or you can do it by relationships. And I know too often I may not take the time to do the harder way of doing it through relationships and through more kindness and love versus, do it because you have to do it. It has to get done, and that really frustrates me, and I feel that I can change a lot in that area.
So, as I mentioned, I spent 5 years doing criminal litigation, court martials, etc. And in that particular context, something that I wrestled through over and over again is what is justice and what is my role in ensuring that justice occurs in this particular situation. And I had the opportunity, which is common in the Army but rare in the civilian world, to spend half my time as a prosecutor and then half my time as a defense attorney. And so I was able to wear both hats and think about it from both sides. And maybe surprising to some when people talk to me about this time, they say, "What was harder? Was it harder to be a Christian as a prosecutor, or harder to be a Christian as a defense attorney?" And I think they assume I'll just say, "Well, a defense attorney, of course, right? You have to represent a bunch of criminals and try to get them off." But I think the reality was it was harder to be a Christian as a prosecutor, in part because you have a ton of power. And as one of my colleagues once said, our job every day is to ruin people's lives. And he said that, or kind of tongue in cheek, right? But still, when you're 27 years old and you have the ability to bring a murder charge against somebody, and then shape the way the evidence gets presented, or even how the investigations run, your ego can get involved, and it can become like a sport where you're battling it out in order to win another notch on your belt. And so, as a prosecutor, one of the things that I had to think through is what is justice, biblically, and actually had an opportunity to preach about that at Trinity not too long ago. And one element that you see in the Old Testament over and over again is this idea of eye for eye, tooth for tooth, that type of thing, which sounds kind of barbaric. But the reality, when you really look at what Moses and God is trying to get at, is that there should be proportionality in the punishment. That was typically what I would wrestle through as a prosecutor. It's not that there wasn't usually a question. Sometimes there's a question: did somebody do it? But often the question was, how bad is this act? And is it all about high-fiving at the end of the court-martial when the guy gets 50 years when you argued for 50 or whatever it is? Are we really looking to see eye for eye, tooth for tooth? Are we looking for proportionality, or are we just playing this game? So I could go on, but that's one that I've had to wrestle through.
I would say it's more of a pride issue for me. Just from the majority of my jobs I've worked at since meeting Jesus in 2001, it was predominantly working with Christians. And I was a new believer, so oftentimes people would say, "Well, you're a Christian, so can you talk to this guy because he doesn't work? He's getting paid to work, and can you make him work? Because he's the worst worker here." So for me, that was a challenge for me, because I was like, our job's to work. We're created to cultivate. We're created to, like the guys were saying earlier, to glorify God in everything that we do, and that we spend thousands of hours. In fact, we spend probably more hours at our jobs than we even do with our families. When I started thinking about it, because we're actually sleeping for a third of our life. Over a third of our life is at work, and then our kids are in bed so we actually spend more time with the people we work with. And so my challenge was always how to handle non-believers' questions to believers who were supposed to be working and not. And so that was my big area that I wrestled with.
Okay.
Awesome. On how to respond to that without just physical violence.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I thought of too. I know a lot of people here are probably working with people that claim to follow the Lord, follow Jesus, but their work life is a horrible testimony. and they're actually combating that in front of their coworkers with this person that's claiming to follow Jesus. But I was just talking to somebody recently about that this week. But let's do this. Let's open it up to you guys. And if you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll try to work around the room to different questions. And just speak loud enough so everybody in here can hear. So I feel like we just have a lot of wisdom up here I'm excited about. So who's got a question? Yeah.
So a lot of the things that we've been talking about today are very immediate focused. Like, you're going to go to work on Monday, and how should you think about the problems you're encountering? Or how to choose a job because you're unemployed or underemployed. And I'm wondering, and so it's all very helpful, and it's been great to hear you guys this morning. I wonder if we flip it on our head though, and you think of like 5 to 7 years, and if you were to think about characteristics that would demonstrate success or faithfulness in filling out your vocation, like what would some of those characteristics be, and how, what do you think would be present?
Like, how would you define success, kind of?
Yeah, because a lot of times we're thinking, I just need to make it through this week, and these interactions with this person need to take on a certain kind of character, or I need to display this kind of humility. And sometimes we don't think, a little bit bigger picture, and then back into, how should I do decision making now based on what I want to do, or like what success or faithfulness would look like in a 5-7 year time range.
Sure. Whoever wants to field that can take a shot. Yeah.
Can you kind of say back a little bit of what is being said with the questions, because it's hard to hear it back here?
Okay, yeah. 5 to 7 years down the road, kind of big picture, what would define kind of success as you look ahead? Not just in the day-to-day kind of character decisions, going to work on Monday, stuff that's applicable right now, but what would kind of define where I could say I was successful in living out the gospel over the longer term. Is that a fair representation? Okay. I
mean, I would personally say, how well do we know the people we work with? For instance, in a 5-year span, some of the people who before we planted Revolution and moved back here from Seattle, Washington, I started thinking about the people who I only worked with for like 3 to 4 years. And people who had brokenness that they had the ability to share with me, and that we got to share and engage in each other's lives. We shared meals. Some of these people met Jesus. There was a lot of things where I was willing to be vulnerable, which is a challenge for an Irishman. But there's areas where we actually went deep into each other's lives. We got to know them. They came into our house. We went to their house. And now, depending on your profession, how you can do that, I think it might be a little bit different. But how well do we know the people we work with? Even if it's 1 or 2 relationships. Like Bart was saying, our jobs are a mission field. And that's so true. Because we get to engage people in a spot where we're going to see them for so many hours, not only in a week, but in our lifetime if we're there for any extended period of time. And if it's only 5 years, how many of those people have we actually engaged with in what God has been doing in our life? And some of that takes time to build that relationship with people over time, but also how do we actually listen to them and the struggles that they're walking through, and are we able to speak into that with spending time with them, not giving up on them, because they're going to still be punching in on Monday, and we're going to see and spend lots of conversation, because we can talk about a lot of things at work, and can we not talk about the greatest influence in our life of Jesus Christ?
Yeah, so one of the ways that I've combated what I mentioned previously is that just realizing that when you're at work, people are watching you, regardless of your position. People are watching how you carry yourself, how you act. One of the things that I've always strived for is I knew that people are going to come and go and decide to do different things, but when they were at Emergent, I wanted them to think of it as, man, that's one of the greatest places I ever worked. They had integrity, and that's really important to me. I think that one of the things, it's kind of funny, at my office, I'm very tight, strict, I don't know what you want to call it, but about the language that's used in the office. Just keep it clean, keep it professional. And I apply that to the vendors that come in and work with us. And for a while, we got this rap of the company that you can't swear at. You can't go there and swear at their vendors. That was the rep that we had. And I actually liked that a lot. Because it was just one more thing where they could go, there's something different about how they do things there. But in your question about success, one of the things, I've tried, I would try very hard not to let the world apply their definition of success to what you define as success, because it's likely not going to line up with the gospel at times. I've found throughout the 12 years that I've been doing this that there are so many opportunities to make decisions that at the time you feel like you're making the right career decision or whatever it is, and it's just a simple step this way and this way and this way, and then all of a sudden you're over here and you go, how did I get here? And in the world's eyes, you're like, well, maybe that's what success looks like to them. But when you think about success, you need to bring in how does that look in the context of the gospel? How does that look in the context of family, right? We all make decisions about work, and what's one of the biggest thing that suffers because of work? It's our families, right? It's time away from our kids. It's things like that. And the devil is not stupid. He doesn't give you black and white where it's clearly, well, I'm going to choose this. It's always gray. It's always very fuzzy, and it just slowly moves you one way or another. And so that's how I would answer that.
And I think, like, when I'm saying success, I'm not thinking like career success as much as like success in fulfilling all of your like God-given callings, like in the workplace, in the family. So I'm thinking even like the combination of all the right decisions on a weekly basis and then what that looks like at a 5-year milestone. You know what I mean?
I think so related. I think my answer is getting at what you're saying. I'm now more in a position of management, so I'm doing less of the actual work and more managing people. And so I've thought about, all right, I have this team, and I inherited a team, and what's success in 5 years with this team? How should it look like? Is it we got this much done? We maybe avoided all these regulatory issues for the company. We stayed out of lawsuits, that type of thing. And then what's unique about the team that I have is that it's sort of a ragtag group that I inherited with significant HR challenges, Tom. I know my HR person very well. And in part, I was given the responsibility of sort of cleaning it up and getting it tight. And my boss's definition of success, I think, would be, it's a tight ship, which is one of my goals. And there's a stewardship that I have to my boss and the owners of the company, right? We need to run it well. And so there's a tension that I feel because, on the other hand, I want to be known as a manager that there's grace. There's a story of grace, even if I'm dealing with people that deserve to be maybe fired, right? What point do I decide that I'm going to give them another chance, or I'm going to let that one go, right? And not because I'm afraid to deal with the issue, but because I want a spirit of grace to be something that shines. And so I think there's a fine line. I think you could fall in the ditch on the left and right on this one. But I would want to be known as a manager that has grace. And it's the way I've put it, even with people, and I've tried to use that term, as said, I think I'm going to show some grace on this one, because grace has been shown to me.
I think all I would add is, just in the spirit of what we talked about earlier today, if we all believe that God is actively working through us to keep things going, to work, to create culture, to meet needs, then the people that we work with or that work for us, helping them develop their gifts and abilities to do the best they can is important. But a lot of times it's easy to just focus on me and am I going to get my next promotion, or am I getting what I need out of this? And I think to be really successful as Christians, as managers, it's about how we can develop other people so they can experience the joy and the fulfillment of using their gifts and abilities together. And that's a really incredibly hard thing to do right now, because just with all the conflict in society and the me focus, it's really hard to get people to work together and to create a good positive culture. But I think if you can do that, it would be really satisfying.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I'm just curious, how many guys here actually oversee other people in your jobs, other employees, or so quite a few of you. What's another question you have for some of the guys up here? Yeah, Nathan.
I'm not sure if we have any introverts on the panel, but sometimes when we think about evangelism, we think it's very extroverted. The process of making relationships with people at work to get real and deep with them is very extroverted. Maybe can you speak to what it's like being an introvert and being a witness at work?
Okay, so the question is, what's it like being an introvert and being a witness at work as an introvert? Maybe a couple of you can. Who's an introvert here? Any introverts? Are you an extrovert
Just don't
too,
say
Tom?
much, you know?
Everybody's an extrovert up here.
I'm a quiet extrovert. I actually had a good story on building a relationship. There was a guy that called on our company for insurance, and he and I just hit it off, just in a friendship. And I think, no matter if you're introverted or not, I think all of us can build friendships. And what happened was, through a course of a number of conversations, he came to consider Christ. And he was really far away from God. And it wasn't anything I did. It was more just being willing to be his friend. And we happened to have some common interests. So it was pretty easy to just, like James and enjoy him and want to spend time with him. And so I think maybe being sensitive to the opportunities God has around you, because a lot of times I'll miss those promptings or those opportunities, and later on I'll kind of kick myself because I realized there was an opportunity to engage somebody in conversation, but I just kind of missed it.
So I'm not an introvert, but I can think of an introvert that I've worked with. Why are you laughing?
Go ahead, sorry.
That's right. You're supposed to mock the panel members?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm laughing with you. I'm laughing with you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Don't go all lawyer on me.
And, and it's to my point. I mean, you don't say a lot. I mean, I was joking when I said that, but the person I'm thinking about, of course, your life speaks, right? But it's, more than that. I mean, I know a lot of us probably know that, the way we live, the way we carry ourselves with dignity. But this particular person had, in their cube, I can't remember exactly what, but some manifestation of the fact that they were a believer, like a quote or a Bible verse. And their life combined with that, they didn't have to say anything. It was the gospel in action. And people come by and would see it. And, I know they respected this person. So that's a thought.
Yeah. Let's open it up for another question. Yeah.
I know some guys around me who are really high capacity guys and do a ton of things at home and work and elsewhere. And I feel like they almost like set this bar here. It's like subconsciously for me, where sometimes I feel like I like ask myself if I'm like being faithful, if I'm not achieving at a level that they are. But I feel like I just burn myself out in like 2 weeks if I did that. Could you speak to just maybe some principles you think about if you were talking to a guy who's saying, am I being faithful in my work if I just feel like this is my bar and it doesn't look like what these guys can do, but I feel like to be healthy I need to take some time off, or I need to end my work day at this time or whatever. Like what's the maybe principles you think about if you were, like, at what point would you call someone out and say, okay, that's maybe laziness, and maybe this is like, these are some healthy ways to think about your work capacity.
That's a good question. So what does it mean to be faithful to your capacity level? Because everybody's got different capacity lines. I'm curious, maybe, Jamie, I'll put you on the spot. How do you see that with your employees. You see ones, I'm sure, that have a super high capacity, and you want to hold them accountable to what they're capable of, and then also coach other ones that don't have the same capacity. Like, how do you do that overseeing a team?
Yeah, that's very challenging. And there's also, I'll throw another dynamic in there. There's some people who set limits very well on personal time and work time, and there's others who will allow you to push that. And the challenge is when I know that I can push that and not taking advantage of that. That's a difficult question because there are some people that, I had a guy that worked for me that just he would sleep 4 hours a night. That's all he needed, and he operated at a very high capacity and was successful because of that. I don't know how to answer that.
Sure.
I think that laziness becomes obvious over time, especially when you're working in groups of people and in teams, and they can tell like somebody's not pulling their weight, and that's not something you want to be known of you. But I don't know if I can.
Anybody else have a thought about that? No, it's challenging.
Yeah, it is. And I think we also go in, different areas of our life, we have different demands. For example, when I had young kids at home, I wanted to make sure I was home by 6, and I could have worked later, but I didn't. And now that my kids have left the home, I can work later, and I can feel good about that because there aren't the other commitments that I have. But as far as your own work, I think if you're doing the very best you can in the hours that you should be there, and you're working hard, and you're being a good steward, and you're not wasting time fooling around, being lazy, I think you're doing a good job. Then to compare yourself with a person who's, like he was saying, maybe an extraordinary worker, or somebody who maybe isn't even making good decisions about their personal time, that may not be a fair comparison for you. Hopefully your management or your manager knows those differences and respects them, but if somebody isn't working hard and is lazy, I think most people would be able to recognize that pretty quickly. The other is just is more like extra credit, and some people want to do more and can, and right now in our culture we do reward people who may make bad personal decisions to work harder. And that's not right, but it's kind of the way culture is evolved.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that struck me when the question is this idea of recognizing how God has made you and being okay with that, but at the same time being willing and have a sense of wanting to learn from others, but not being overwhelmed by that. So it's a point of tension. On one hand, you know who you are, but you're not necessarily 100% content with that. Part of you is eager to borrow from others in the way they do things. And I think you can fall into a ditch on the left and the right. You can become so obsessed with others that have greater strength that you push yourself, and you develop a little psychosis almost over trying to get to your point that you could maybe never be. And on the other hand, you could become so content that it drifts into laziness.
Okay.
Can I just say one last thing too? Is
Yeah.
just the idle comparison too. It's something that's easy to fall into. Like, oh man, I need to work harder like this guy or whatever, and maybe that's not the capacity that you have. But it's easy to also say on the other extreme, say, at least I'm doing better than that guy. And so it's easier to throw him under the bus. You know what I'm saying? Well, that guy's going to get canned first, right? Or that guy, nobody can perform like that guy, and we can actually slander them too. But getting to know those people too, and knowing and finding out like what brings them to that kind of capacity. Maybe it is sin. Maybe it's not. Maybe they're just driven dudes and they want to glorify God, and that's just how God's wired them too. As well as the other guy, maybe he's had health issues. Instead of just jumping to conclusions, but also not jumping to the idol of comparison either, because that's really easy to do.
Yeah, great question. Another one. Sure.
This one's a complicated one, but that's for the whole panel. One being the owner and legal and HR, and the other at the end, just being a Christian. The question is, coming from a follower of Jesus Christ and trying to represent Him in everything that we do. And this morning's discussion, our job, our workplace is supposed to define us as men. I understand that, but when it is taken away from you due to this society, and you're trying to still provide for your family, and yet you're broken, your body physically, because it's a labor job, and your civil rights are affected, how do we come back to our employer and honor them in a loving manner, but still have the vision of what God placed before us? And yet, this individual doesn't want to, because it is challenging. But then I'm ordered, because I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, to do God's will. That I think is His will, because of the destruction of what has gone on with the whole employment and the laws that are out there protect the businesses, the right to work law, which Wisconsin just passed the other day.
I hear a couple questions there. Let me divide them and see if I'm hearing you right. The first one is kind of, how do you wrestle with these issues of identity when a job is taken away, or when, say, you feel like you're not able to provide for your family like you should, and you're wrestling with identity. So there's the identity question, struggles with that, but then there's this other question of, how do you respond to when you have been wronged, in the workplace, and how do you maybe take one of those or both of those in answering?
Let me just, my dad was in that situation. He worked for the same company for 50 years, and they kind of just pushed him out because he couldn't physically do the job anymore. His knees gave out, his back went out. I mean, it was super labor intensive. He started working at the job when he was 18, and he worked, I think, for like 87 cents an hour when he first got hired there. And now he drives school bus, and he gets paid more driving school bus than he did at his highest pay rate at that company after 50 years. And I know my dad was super frustrated by that from the employer itself. A lot of people saw my dad's, I'll just say, witness in that, because he didn't throw stones at the employer. In some ways, I was like, I wanted to, because they just really shameful things, right? But the witness that my dad shared with us as a family, never calling in sick. He never called in sick in 50 years, which is crazy. And that's not, he wasn't a workaholic. He actually spent time with every one of us kids. There was 5 of us. But he actually still would pray for his employers. And he would just say, you know what, I'm going to be on my knees in the morning, and I'm going to still pray for them. He still has conversations with them since he's been retired for 5+ years. And almost all the employees he still knows. He still lets them know they all love him, they respect him, they know where he's at. And that's actually built a relationship with people since then, since he's been gone, even more so than all the years that he actually was at the company, and how he actually left well, if that makes any sense. And part of it's humility, man. And it's a hard issue. It's a hard problem that I think we can easily say it's not fair, and it isn't. I want to address that. It's not fair, but how we also still pray for and still lead in that area, our families, whether it's financially, how do we still do that? The community around my parents, people pitched in for certain areas where my dad at times were like, are we going to pay some bills? The community pitched in, the Christian community actually. And that, to me, that's a testimony of what God's doing too in the greater community, that we're not to do it on our own. And so I would say lean into your community too in that.
Thanks, Jared. Anybody else want to respond to either identity or being kind of wronged in some way in the workplace?
Yeah, on identity, we do as men identify ourselves with our jobs, and that's not necessarily right, and our job shouldn't be our identity, but I think a lot of it we get from culture, and just as men, we feel that. So when we're unemployed or we lose a job, then we feel like our identity is taken away. And also I see that on the other end, I'm a little closer to retirement than a lot of you guys. And I hear a lot of guys say, I just want to retire and not work. And I think they're shortchanging themselves too, because the goal of life isn't just to make a lot of money so you can retire early and not do anything. I think God has a purpose and mission for us as long as we're alive. And if we're not working in a job for pay because we're unemployed for a while or not able to work, we're able to minister and through our churches, small groups, meet a lot of needs in society, whether it's food shelves or marriages or hurting people. And God values that as much as a paying job, but in our culture, we just don't feel the value unless you get paid for it. So I think we have to kind of rethink that too. And then also as we are dealing with our brothers who are unemployed, to be more supportive, more helpful, more encouraging, because I know a lot of times people that are unemployed feel kind of isolated and alone, and that's not good either.
So maybe I'll take up if you're wronged in the workplace, how do you handle that type of thing? You're treated unjustly. And while I don't have the legal background specifically from HR or labor law, I mean, that's something that I dealt with on the criminal side a lot. And so you have a victim, and it sounds like in your situation, there's, it sounds like there's a possibility that you've been victimized to some degree by an unjust employer. And the things I think about in that scenario are, as Christians, there's nothing in the Bible that says just to kind of take it from the man, right, and roll over and don't pursue, what's right and just for you. I think part of pursuing justice can be on the behalf of others, but also can be justice in your particular situation. But I think that it's hard to be completely objective when you are in the victimized spot, and it's easy to become angry. It's easy to become bitter. It's easy to have a heart that's no longer really pursuing what's right, but it can become sort of a selfish thing. It's about me getting what's my due, and you get caught up in a kind of a negative spiral. And so I saw that in working with victims on the criminal side, where they weren't really interested in justice anymore. They were interested in justice plus revenge. And I think that a good way, maybe practically, to handle that is to, know your heart. Know that can happen, and don't necessarily give up on justice, but bring people along with you that can help spot that and help you keep your heart orientated in a way that can still pray for your enemy and be a good check to avoid that extreme as you walk through it.
Good. Yeah, let's get another question. Sure.
I got one. So I'm a project manager, and one of my duties is on tough, tight schedules. One of my responsibilities is to basically call up and ask whoever's out there doing my project to stay long hours, stay away from their family. They're either not traveling home to make some of those hard calls. How do you deal with tight schedules from a Christian perspective where maybe I'm making that phone call at 8 o'clock right before I punch out and head home, but I'm leaving somebody out on a project who's got to work the full weekend? Like, how do you gracefully manage that? You know, like, how do I show Christ by telling somebody, hey, I need you to cancel your flights home, stay there all weekend and work. I'm going to go home and grab dinner quick. By the way, Jesus loves you.
I'm going to just repeat the question. So from a project manager standpoint, how do you ask, as a follower of Jesus, how do you ask people to make sacrifices that are pressing into their kind of work, personal life balance, staying the weekend, working late, etc.? How do you handle that as a supervisor?
I'll take this one because I have a lot of experience with this.
Last night.
Last night I had 10 guys working with me over here at this data center across the street, and from noon yesterday till 8 a.m. this morning, and I felt terrible about it. But one of the ways that I've tried to handle that, fortunately, I'm in a position where I have the ability to reward them. I can say, take Monday off. I can, I'll tell you the best thing is get a gift card for their wife for a spa. It's great, man. Keep the wives happy. One of the things that I've always tried to do is, and this is what I was doing last night, I can't do a lot of the technical, we do IT consulting, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned that, but I can't do a lot of the technical work anymore. I'm too far removed from it, but I can be there. And actually, I had one of our project managers was there till 4 a.m., and he couldn't do anything else, but he could be there. And he could, I always say, I'm carrying the flag, right? I'm buying pizza, I had my wife bring cookies over last night. It sucks. It does suck. We get those calls that I had a call from a client of ours at 4:30 on Friday of Labor Day weekend, and I was on my way out of town, and I had to start calling people saying, Can you drive over here? Can you help these people out? And I felt terrible about it, but I think that they've seen. The way I've operated with them, and this isn't about me, but of trying to help carry that flag and carry that burden and do whatever I can, that you can sometimes get this loyalty built where they know I'm going to do everything I can to help them, and they're going to do the same. So I try to lead by example. I know sometimes maybe like you're in my position where I can't really help anymore. I can't do the work that they can do. And it is hard to do.
Yeah, can't go wrong with a spa gift card, that's for sure. Anybody else?
The only question I would ask is there a way to maybe back up a step and influence the culture so maybe that doesn't happen as much? Or in some cases, it's unavoidable because there's a technical thing that breaks down? Or is it the company culture where, we just, load on this on people? And is there a way for you as a leader in the company to influence management so that that's less the norm and it's a more humane environment, or is it just the way it is?
For me in particular, I'm managing vendors, construction companies, and other people like that, so it's mostly my company having goals and deadlines that I have to hit. Maybe they make a change, and so I've got to call somebody up and say, hey, by the way, you just built it this way, we want to change it, have it built this way, but it still needs to be done on this date, it still needs to be done by this dollar amount. So it's kind of one of those where it's not like my employees, where when I was out in the field, I could be there with the trades and I could help them, but now I'm sitting in an office and I've got people in Hawaii and New York, and I can't go out and be on site with them, and they're not my company either, so it's kind of like, it gets tricky because you're not necessarily managing the people that you're working with, but they're partners and people that I partner with every day and they do projects for us. So it's it gets a little tricky, but there's definitely probably scheduling and just trying to catch some of that stuff up front, but just in the culture of construction, things come up last minute all the time, as I'm sure it happens in every other industry.
And sometimes you can't do anything about it, but at the very least you can appreciate and be thankful and all that type of thing. And a recognition. And I mean, that sometimes goes longer than just you standing there, late at night with them. But
Yeah, good. Let's do one more question, and then we need to take a break before the next session. Yeah, right here.
I think sometimes as Christians it's hard in a non-Christian environment to live out your faith, and you kind of want to acquiesce and kind of give in on your faith a little bit, and just fit it, not stick out and live your faith out. I don't know what you guys' past is like in some of that regard. Maybe you could speak to some of that. You're standing up and living as a Christian and standing out for your faith in one place.
So maybe what have been the challenges in standing up as a Christian in the workplace? Is that fair? Okay.
I'll give you just two simple, quick examples. When I worked for a medical company, a lot of it was just, we had a lot of conversations, but they knew I was a Christian early on. It wasn't like, surprise, I'm a Christian, 2 years after knowing them. And so they saw things like, I did work really hard. My dad instilled work ethic in me at a young age, and so I did want to work hard, but I also pitched in for those guys, some guys, and it went a long ways, and it built the opportunity to have conversations down the road, and as we were doing it together, it was awesome. And then more recently, I still have a planting business on the side, and I get to have conversations with customers. Oftentimes, they ask me about they're like, is this what you really do for your job? I'm like, actually, no. And then I can say I'm a pastor, but you're like, oh, well, not all of us can say that. You can say you're a Christian, right? There's ways to engage people in conversation. Like, I like to dig in the dirt. I like simple things. I like working with my hands. But the conversation will come up as like, I like to dig in the dirt. I like to be outside, celebrating and sometimes I'll even say, now granted, I'm my own boss in that sense, so I can say things maybe that you feel like you wouldn't be able to say. But I'll say, I'm out here, what a beautiful day that the Lord's made. And they're like, wow, we're Jewish, but we actually totally understand that. And I've actually had that. That was recently. And so then we start talking, and they're like, oh, I need to start reading the Torah again. And I'm like, yeah, maybe we can read together. Before you know, the conversation is, and there's like 50 years between me and this couple. But a lot of them are just simple conversations, and not forcing the hand before we built relationship, but also not being ashamed either of being able to engage people over time. Like, do the dudes afterwards get together outside of work? Where do they go? Where do they hang out? Getting to know some of these people, and maybe they're not the kind of places you can go as a follower of Jesus, if it's strip joint or something like that, right? But maybe it's some other areas to engage them in their territory too, where you can actually invest in them as image bearers of God, and just kind of build relationships.
the piece I was thinking about is, there's a lot you could do, like practical steps to share your faith and this or that, but when I've boiled it all down to, I think it comes down to keeping your heart hot for love for other people. Really cultivate a heart at work where people don't become pawns that you're using, and pray for them, and really, even if they're driving you crazy, figure out a way that you can somehow not just fake love them to use them, but really love them, and then keep your heart hot and in love with God. And if your heart is hot, it's just going to happen.
Yeah. My wife and I do this fitness class every week, and the woman that leads it, she's like in her 50s and just in amazing shape, right? It's embarrassing. But anyway, after a year of being in this class, this was like a few weeks ago, the conversation came up. She was like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm a pastor, actually. And she goes, oh, that's nice. And she goes, I always pictured you as a swearer. And I'm like, what does that mean? What? I gave off that vibe, like a swearer? Anyway, go ahead. No, this was an example of people, a lot of times they're caught off guard when the time comes up, but even after you lay a foundation and opportunities come up, because then I had an opportunity to tell her more about, where I work and what we do. And now, as she sees me, you can see her jokes have changed, and how she's responding around me and so forth. But it creates opportunities that I was caught off guard, but there was an opportunity to talk more.
Fighting for opportunities too, like just steady engaged. Like before we start today, I think God might open up some opportunities.
Yeah. Tom, you were going to say something, and then we'll wrap up.
No, I really appreciate what you said. I think it does go back to your heart, and it's really easy to try and fake it and to not really care about people because you're busy or you've got stuff going on. But if you really have a heart that's close to God and you care about people, I think that's what makes the difference. But it takes the effort to invest in that in your life every morning in your quiet time or weekly, whatever you do. And if you don't do it, I think people don't sense that it's real because it's not in your life.
Awesome. Hey, let's give these guys a hand just for being up here.